Medical errors are the third leading cause of death in America, but yet our medical systems aren't getting any better considering the misdiagnosis is such a big cause of actual death or things that actually can have serious consequences.
Misdiagnosis or correct medications with the correct diagnosis of just the side effects of those medications. And then people are put on other medications for the side effects of the first medication. Medications have their place again, but we're not facing this chronic disease epidemic, this autoimmune epidemic, this mental health epidemic because of a medication deficiency.
Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Biohack-it. And today I'm so excited to be bringing in Dr. Will Cole. Will, you and I have known each other a little bit through social media over the years. We've done a few lives in the past. I've been following your work. And I'm just excited to have you on Biohack-it and everybody learn a little bit more about you. You're somebody who's so respected and admired in the space. And I think you have such a wealth of knowledge. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Iman. Nice to see you.
So a little bit more background on Dr. Will Cole. He is a leading functional medicine expert and practitioner. He's also a best-selling author. I actually personally read a lot of your books and absolutely love them. And one of the top 50 functional medicine practitioners in the country. And you were also one of the first ones to get onto telemedicine and really grow and scale your practice, which is such a need that we have these days.
Yeah, we're the first functional medicine telehealth center over 14 years ago. I can't believe it. It's been a long time, but yeah, I love what I get to do.
And it's crazy with telemedicine's advancement, the amount of people you've been able to touch and heal and work with and help just with bringing that into a practice.
Yeah, it absolutely. It started, we didn't even have the language of telehealth 14 plus years ago. We called it a virtual functional medicine clinic because there was no such thing as telehealth. It was just Skype and yeah, that's what it was, Skype and us figuring it out as we went along. How do we get labs to them? How do we work through all of the steps to get them access to this exciting field of healthcare that I'm so passionate about? And then obviously telehealth started arising over that time. And then I realized, oh yeah, that's what we've been doing all along. It's telehealth. And the pandemic just sped it all up. People just had to figure it out overnight in every space, whether it's healthcare or something else. How do we do things remotely and reimagine what's possible? And we didn't have to do anything. We were already doing it. So it was an easy, if anything, it just raised awareness on what we do. So yeah.
What was amazing, I'm having this conversation with you today because it goes into the first kind of discussion point that I want to touch upon is the difference between functional medicine and traditional Western medicine. So this morning driving into work, basically I had a conversation with a girlfriend. She's been diagnosed with a cyst and she went to let's say a gynecologist and she's not getting straight answers and she's super frustrated. And I was like, this is exactly what's broken in the Western medical system, right? She's getting spun around, just being told, hey, just take this pill. And that's it. And she's like, but how long do you have to take the pill? What's the deal? So I wanted to talk and hear from you a little bit more about the baseline. What is the difference between functional medicine and Western medicine and how it truly heals the body? We
interpret labs using a thinner reference range, first and foremost. If anybody that's listening or watching this, they'll know when they go to their doctor, they'll have their number on their lab and then this X to Y interval number that they're being compared to. And if it's outside of that range, it's marked high or low. We get that reference range largely from a statistical bell curve average of people who go to labs. And people that go to labs are sadly not the healthiest group of people that you're being compared to. So there's a lot of people that intuitively know something's off, maybe like your friend, this fatigue, these hormonal symptoms, these digestive problems, these neurological symptoms, these metabolic issues are not normal, but largely these labs come back quote unquote normal. What the doctor is unintentionally telling them is you're looking a lot like the other people that we're comparing you to, which are people that are going through issues too. Just because something's common doesn't necessarily make it normal. We should not normalize what's going on today from a chronic health problem. So we're looking at a tighter interval of numbers in functional medicine, tighter within that larger reference range of where does vibrant wellness reside? Where does longevity reside? Where does health span reside? Where does living a long, healthy, fruitful, abundant life live? That's the functional range where your body is functioning the best. That's where we get our name in functional medicine. So we're looking at optimal health, not average in functional medicine. We're also running more comprehensive labs. It's based on health history, but looking at root cause issues, or what we call upstream in functional medicine. So what are the core problems that are causing these symptoms? Now, the symptoms in many ways are like check engine lights on the body, like the fatigue, the anxiety, the digestive problems, the weight gain, the hair loss, the skin problems. Those are all check engine lights. You don't want to just cover up the check engine light and see you later. We want to look at what's underneath that proverbial hood and seeing what's misfiring. So underlying gut problems, chronic infections, nutrient deficiencies, hormonal imbalances, and then mind-body things too as well. I mean, like chronic stress, unresolved trauma, and looking at how all these things impact that check engine light and addressing that. And the third thing is about we take into account bio-individuality. We're all different, and you could have the same label, like let's say labeling someone with hypothyroidism. There's there's a copious amount of underlying issues that could be causing that low thyroid issues. So we want to get a good, thorough differential diagnosis and understanding the nuance and the complexity that is you, and not just, dealing with the tip of the iceberg. So we're using food as medicine. We're using natural medicines, herbs, botanicals. We're using mind-body practices, somatic practices, breath work, meditation, trauma work, and different biohacking therapies, and medications when needed to really be tailored to the individual. So that's what functional medicine is.
It's really crazy to me to think, like, still in this day and age with all the information that we know, all the research and the data that has come out, yet we still try to label people by a checklist of symptoms. So you go to the doctor, you're like, symptom, just take this, versus normally by the time you're ill, that's a reaction to your body already showing you something else is kind of going on.
Absolutely. Researchers estimate that it's by the time somebody's diagnosed, it's on average 4 to 10 years prior to that diagnosis when things are brewing on this, what I call an inflammation spectrum, because most health problems have inflammation at its roots. There's something causing the inflammation. So we want to figure out what that is. Inflammation's not inherently bad, but there's something disturbing or dysregulating the immune system, of which inflammation is a product of. You're right. And they're all treated the same, but, and it's a whole training system. It's a way that conventional doctors are trained. They're trained to diagnose a disease and match it with a medication. And it's just sort of this medicinal pharmaceutical matching game. It has its place. We're not anti-medication in functional medicine. We just want to ask the question, what is your most effective option that causes you the least amount of side effects? And for some people, they're alive because of medication. They need to be on it because it fits that criteria of being the most effective, causing them the least amount of side effects. But today, it's so many examples where it's not the most effective option. It has a lot of potential side effects, and it's the only option discussed within with the doctor-patient relationship.
And I think also the doctor liability thing, medical errors are the third leading cause of death in America, but yet our medical systems aren't getting any better, considering the misdiagnosis is such a big cause of actual death, or things that actually can have serious consequences. Yeah,
misdiagnosis, or the correct medications with the correct diagnosis of just the side effects of those medications. And then people are put on other medications for the side effects of the first medication. It's like, look, medications have their place again, but we're not facing this chronic disease epidemic, this autoimmune epidemic, this mental health epidemic because of a medication deficiency. So what's the actual cause of why we're having this? And these are the questions that we're asking in functional medicine. In Western medicine, we'll oftentimes hear the phrase idiopathic, like we don't know the cause, it's idiopathic. Well, that we actually do know the causes of many health issues. And the researchers in the scientific community are looking at this, the field of epigenetics. And that's what we're actually addressing in functional medicine, versus it's not even discussed largely in the conventional model. Things are changing. I mean, the Cleveland Clinic has a functional medicine center we're all trained through the Institute for Functional Medicine. So there are certainly brilliant, bright pockets within conventional medicine that are trying to do better, but they're few and far between. The system has to change, and we're only just beginning.
Obviously, you all know I'm a biohacking fanatic and I absolutely love peptides. So you can only understand how excited I was when I discovered a skincare brand that works, that uses peptides. That is OneSkin. OneSkin uses the amazing OS1 peptide. OS1 works by actually switching off the senescent cells that drive the aging of your skin. Scientifically proven to give you biologically younger skin with long-lasting improvements in firmness, elasticity, reduction of fine lines and wrinkles, and a more youthful complexion. You can learn more about the OS1 peptide at oneskin.co and use my code Biohack-it for 15% off your purchase.
You touched upon something about how nutrition also plays such a key role in not only how we age, but how we heal and take care of our bodies. Can we go a little bit further into that, like with you working in your practice, how you're treating patients?
Yeah, I mean, it starts with the unsexy stuff, but it's so important. It's listening to a person, right? It's a comprehensive health history and asking questions and being curious, and this sort of duality of what we do, both the science and the art of functional medicine. And you can open it up to any space within healthcare. It's really digging deep and asking questions that haven't been asked before. And that will determine what labs, what protocol, what next steps are being done. So it starts with health history. And that's when I'm talking to people online, like we're talking right now, and asking a lot of questions, about an hour and a half full of talking on that, not just with them. And then outside, I'm preparing prior to it too. So it's really in depth, and that determines what labs are appropriate. And labs are looking at the pieces to the puzzle. Like, why is that check engine light on? And running things like a comprehensive blood panel, and I'm coordinating with local labs to get them, done easily for them wherever they're at. And then things like microbiome testing or environmental toxin testing or hormonal testing, nutrient deficiencies. So if we're looking and compiling data, and we want to look at what's the confluence of variables that's giving rise to those symptoms. So that's the beginning stages. And then we tailor protocols based off of that data. And we could do it subdiagnostically. And for some patients, we do. We don't run all the labs right at first, but we know someone's health history. We know some low-hanging fruits that they can do. So there are certainly paths that we help people without labs, but a lot of it is based at least on some labs. It doesn't have to be copious amounts of labs, but it's going to be some data, because we want to be evidence-based and we want to be objective and make sure we're doing what we're doing. We want to make sure we're seeing improvements, seeing inflammation levels come down, seeing cardiometabolic markers or hormonal markers improve, seeing gut health improve. And obviously the person knows when I'm feeling better. That's obviously the most important thing, but those labs are going to be a reflection of why they feel the way that they do. So we want to look at both subjective and objective markers. So we're developing food protocols based off of that information. And because every food, what works for one person may not work for the next person as far as food sensitivities are concerned, and many variables when you talk about digestive health. There are a lot of healthy foods that cause digestive flare-ups for some people. There's a lot of, even beyond just the foods themselves, looking at macronutrients and making sure, okay, so some people be in times of ketosis for therapeutic benefits, yes. And then there's some people that they should not be. So it's making those determinations from a food medicine standpoint. This is nothing new to healthcare. It's basically a remembering of what healthcare used to be. Hippocrates, the father of medicine, every doctor takes the Hippocratic oath. He says, "Let food be thy medicine, medicine thy food." And he also said, all disease begins in the gut. So functional medicine is just OG medicine in a way. It's like remembering our roots and kind of going back, but using the best of modernity, the best of science, which is labs, really, and not just shooting in the dark, but actually knowing what's the mechanism of action and what's going on and why this person feels the way that they do. So, and then we bring in natural medicines and biohacking protocols and somatic practices, mind body practices. So that's in a nutshell. We're clinically monitoring them, coaching them, educating them, empowering them. So these tools can just be their tools and they can continue this journey on their own.
And the beautiful thing I think about functional medicine and how you work with clients is you get them better so then they can lead a life on their own versus being reliant on something or somebody for the rest of their life.
Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. If I'm doing my job, they don't need me. But there's hundreds of millions of people that need me. So I'll be busy. I'm not going to have a lack of work, but the the brilliant thing is even when they get healthy and vibrant and feel good, I still end up seeing them once a year or something like that because they're like running labs or they just like the support system of just living in this modern world of like running things by me or showing me pictures of their grandkids or their pets because we get to be close as on this journey. So but it's not needed. It's like a luxury at that point because they're feeling good. They know what works for them, but they want to check in here and there.
What's your personal diet right now? Because I know back in the day you were vegan and you kind of moved away from that, but what is working for you right now?
So I wrote my first book, Keto-tarian, and that came out in 2018, my journey, because when I was a teenager to my mid-20s, I was a vegan. And I did it because I was a biohacker before biohacking was a thing. I was like the weird kid in the 90s, like going to the health food store, like picking up the random herbs and superfoods that were out there at the time and experimenting with how foods made me feel. So it was a whole food based way of eating, but it was plant-based. And that worked for a long time. I felt fine. I had youth on my side too, right? It was like, we can do a lot of things in our youth. So as I got into my late 20s and early 30s, I evolved to bringing more fish in and grass-fed beef in and shifted things. I never ate a plant-based diet because of religious reasons or ethical reasons. I was doing it from a nutrition science standpoint and wanting to experiment with things. And I enjoyed the food that I was eating, to be honest with you. So it was nothing like high and mighty, but it was a natural evolution and being okay with pivoting and evolving as you learn more, as you check in with your body more. I think so many people hold on to this sort of, their identity becomes whatever it is, right? And for some people, the way that they eat is their identity, especially within veganism and the plant-based world. And I just find that sort of tribalism is antithetical to human like health. We want to evolve. It's okay to pivot. It's okay to check in with your body and what works for you maybe at a certain first season isn't what you always need to be doing. And these are conversations that I have with patients all the time. And to be true, I mean, I have plant-based patients and I have many omnivorous patients, and then we have carnivore age patients too, and everything in between. It's the full spectrum. So I don't have an ideological, fervent bent when it comes to being zealous about these sort of things. I want to find out what gonna get that person feeling the best, the fastest, and what do they enjoy eating. And that's the science and art of that clinical nutrition conversation that I get to have. So what do I eat today, to answer your question? It is basically what I talk about in Keto-tarian. It's healthy fats. It's optimal bioavailable protein. It's lots of fiber-rich fruits. So that's what it is. I do a cyclical ketogenic way of eating. I'm not always in ketosis. I am some days, but it's more intuitive and flexible. And I clean carbs up with fruit, lots of fruits and healthy fiber-rich carbs and rice. I do rice as well. So that's what it is. It's a whole foods diet that is fresh. It's gut healthy. And I enjoy it a lot.
Is there something that you're like, I've done enough research on this ingredient or vegetable or whatever it is, and I'm not touching it?
I'll tell you something that I love that doesn't love me back. And these are beautiful conversations that I get to have with telehealth patients because it's what I call food peace. And I talk about it in some of my books. In Gut Feelings, I talked about it. In Intuitive Fasting, I talked about it. Is food peace. Like how can you lay down this sort of moral indictment of like, that's bad or that's good, but what foods love me back and which foods don't love me back? And that can evolve. As you're improving gut health, that can evolve. So not being identified with that list, but just acknowledging the list for what it is in this present moment. So I don't know if this answers your question, but I love spicy food. I love it. Okay. I like probably OD'd on hot sauce for too long. And right now in my life, nightshade spices do not love me back. I wish they did. But I think it's a combination of maybe overdoing it for a while. And I lost my dad last year, not to get like too personal, but my dad died suddenly in a car accident last year. And I think it was a combination of stress, the books coming out, being busy running the telehealth clinic. And and then the damn hot sauce. So I just had to stop the hot sauce for a while. And I'm working on these somatic practices that we work on with patients. I'm practicing what I teach. So hopefully with time, I can reintroduce some Tabasco sauce in my life.
So you talked something about, you touched upon something personal to you right now. And I'm so sorry about, I think I reached out to you as well
Yes,
about the
thank
loss
you.
of your dad and the loss of parent. I lost both my parents over a course of like a year and a half back to back. I think the idea of like what trauma essentially does to the body. And in your case, it was so sudden. It was so unplanned for what you witnessed. Have you seen that affect your health in any other way as you're working through things and how you're treating Will? Like, you're being Will's actual advocate right now. How are you working through stuff from a health perspective to release some of that trauma?
Yeah. I have a privilege of this is what I do for a living. And I'll tell you the ultimate irony is that happened whenever I was releasing a book, Gut Feelings, about this topic of trauma and stress and putting yourself first as much as you can through a time that is difficult. Cause that cliche of you only can give what you have. And, at that time, I didn't have a lot to give because I was so stressed and all that stuff. So I had to find these pockets of stillness to rebuild my health for myself. And I had a great foundation because of what I do too. So I could have been rattled. My body could have been rattled so much more. And thank God that it wasn't as bad as it could have been. But definitely stress is it is insidious, right? No one is immune to stress. Many of us will normalize stress because it's our everyday, or we gaslight ourselves and we think it's not that bad, but it catches up with us. And that's where I found myself with is like, well, I'm moving too fast. I need to slow down. And I need to take care of myself and integrate these things that we work on with the patient. So I had to repeat myself. It was a blessing to be able to just take what I normally talk about and give it more of it to myself. Admittedly, and most doctors will say this, I'm the worst patient. I'm the worst patient. And I won't pretend it otherwise because I'm always like, well, I don't need it. Or it's not that I'm doing enough. I don't need more. And I needed more. It wasn't my day-to-day healthy eating wasn't going to be enough. But for me, it wasn't so much. Part of it was nutrition, and we can talk about that evolution, but it was more of just saying no and like letting no be my multivitamin and not traveling as much for work and not going to speaking. I did the book tour entirely remotely from the telehealth clinic at that time because my dad passed away. And then 3 weeks later is when the book came out. So I basically canceled all the travel. And I said, I'm going to do what I can remotely and just let that be. So we did a virtual book tour and all that stuff, which it worked well. It worked well during COVID, and this was post-COVID, so I just kind of continued what I was doing during COVID. So it was a lot of infrared sauna, red light therapy, cold plunging, a lot of biohacking stuff that I would do intermittently, but I really cracked down and I did it consistently. Ozone was another major one for my immune system during that time. And then all of the supplements that I would take here and there, because I primarily use food as medicine, I was just consistent as far as supplementation was concerned because my body needed it. All the things that I tell telehealth patients, like when you're going through a health crisis or your body needs some extra nourishment, you have to up the game. Like just eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner with food, it's first, like food is first, but sometimes food alone isn't enough. And that was a lesson for me during that time and still is. I'm saying that I'm still in this season of repairing.
I think grief, for anybody listening to this, and if you've had a loss, if you lost a parent or a loved one, grief takes time to go through your body, and it comes in waves, and you experience it in different waves. And, you really need to nurture that part of yourself and like feel all your feels as well, but get more in touch with yourself. So what you did is so amazing that you're like, listen, I'm going to eat right. I'm going to do the health stacks that I know that have traditionally worked for me to help me release stress. And then I'm also going to slow down a little bit so that I can catch up with the emotional side of me to really process and grieve and go through that. Because when we get stuck with a grief in our system and we don't let emotions actually come to the surface is when also disease can happen.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I have a family history of autoimmune conditions on both sides of my family. And so there's certain foods that I would have no problem with otherwise that I could not do a lot of or at all. Nightshades were one of them. Peppers, mainly peppers. I could do tomatoes here and there. And nuts and seeds, I don't do nuts and seeds either anymore. And I used to love them, like an almond flour, a cracker. I still recommend them to telehealth patients who tolerate nuts, so I'm not against them. But for me, again, bioindividuality, for me at this point in my life, I was okay with pivoting and evolving. And I think this is an existential issue. Like what I'm going through is I am not like unique in that way because I see it all the time. We have an epidemic of chronic stress, unresolved trauma, environmental toxins, that is impacting our gut microbiome. And this perfect storm of variables, we all need to, at certain parts of our life, need to spend extra care with addressing these variables.
You talk about something a lot, which, I've seen you post about, you've written about it, about the link between the gut-brain connection and how important that is. Essentially, our gut is our first brain, even before it's not our second brain. Mm-hmm. And you really educate people upon that. So can we go into that a little bit more about the link between the two, how it affects your overall health and how it regulates even your emotions?
Yeah. I mean, it's a major aspect of my work and what I'm supporting in my own health right now. And we all should be supporting it all the time. I mean, it really is. So it's, your gut and brain are formed from the same fetal tissue. So when babies are growing in their mother's womb, the gut and brain are formed from the same tissue and they're inextricably linked for the rest of our life through what's known as the gut-brain axis in the scientific literature, the connection between the gut and the brain. Even if you think about it physically, how it looks, resembling, the intestines even resemble the brain. 95% of serotonin is made in the gut, stored in the gut. 50% of dopamine is made in the gut, stored in the gut. These happy, pleasure, mood regulating neurotransmitters are largely made in the gut, and they work upon GI motility, and which stimulates something called the vagus nerve or innervates or enhances the function of the vagus nerve, which is the largest cranial nerve in the body. It gets its root word, it translates as the wanderer. That's the largest cranial nerve in the body. And it is part of the autonomic nervous system, specifically the branch of the parasympathetic, the resting, anti-anxiety, digesting, gut health. So that the mood and the gut health is connected in many ways, but the vagus nerve is what the main pathway that's dysfunctional for a lot of people, because researchers are looking at what they call poor vagal tone or lack of vagal tone because of what's going on in our world. This, what they call an epigenetic genetic mismatch. The researchers call it that. It's this, or an evolutionary mismatch, because our genetics haven't changed largely, researchers estimate, at all, really, in over 10,000 years. But yet our world has changed so dramatically in such a finite period of time when you're putting that in context with the totality of human history. So it's the foods we're eating or not eating. It's environmental toxins. It is nutrient deficiencies because of what we've done to the soil microbiome, and just eating refined, processed, nutrient-less foods, nutrient-deficient food. And all these variables, right? And that we need to take into consideration as to why we're seeing chronic health epidemic like never before in human history. So yeah, it's a problem. But functional medicine is attempting to, fill in the gap there where people are falling through the cracks of it.
So one of the things you touched on is gut health and how that contributes, like your gut essentially forms your brain, this here, the tissue. So does mitochondria help? Because mitochondria comes straight from the mom at the time of conception, and 100% of your mitochondria is inherited from your mother. So does a mother's dysregulation of mitochondrial health affect then the brain development of the child later, you think? Would there be a correlation between that?
Yeah, right. And absolutely. There's a lot of research being done, or over the past 10, 15 years being done, and currently of looking at this exchange of mitochondria, an exchange of immune system function that's happening in utero. Even when you're looking at things like the autism spectrum and the amount of kids that are being affected with autism spectrum disorders, and the connection between certain methylation gene variants, like the MTHFR gene variant, there's something there for many people. And the increased likelihood of the mom going through some sort of autoimmune problem. She may not have an autoimmune disease, but she's some sort of Hashimoto's problem, some sort of autoimmune inflammation issue, or she's undiagnosed but there's some environmental toxin or immune inflammatory response going on in her body. And she may not even know it. And that's impacting the baby as it's growing. And as you mentioned, how the baby's born is going to impact the microbiome. Babies that are born vaginally versus C-section is going to impact the microbiome. So it's not just one thing, but it's a combination it's a perfect storm of variables that are impacting not just kids on the spectrum, but all of us, no matter who you are, if you're neurotypical or not, it doesn't really matter. It's just what's the story that made
place.
where you're at. Yeah. That made where you at now. So it is, certainly something that needs to be looked at, and not to shame anybody, to put fear into anybody, but to empower people and say, well, we all could have done better in our past. I think Maya Angelou said, when you know better, you do better. And that's what I want people to be empowered with. Yes, we all have regrets. We all could have done more. Like, speaking to the parents out there, I'm a parent. I could have done better as a dad. And this is what I do for a living. So give yourself grace, give yourself forgiveness and self-compassion on this. Say, oh man, I should have eaten so much differently when I was going through this. We can't change the past. But what can we do today to start to change not only your health, but your family's health, as far as the dynamic in the home? What's the culture of the home? Because the body is amazingly resilient, and we all are born in this world that has a lot of problems, but the body's amazingly resilient, and the healing capacity is tremendous for most of us.
We wouldn't have a podcast talking about optimizing women's health without talking about BodyBio. I use BodyBio every single day, and their hero product is a necessity for everyone in my house. PC is a pure liposomal phospholipid complex that helps protect the 70 trillion cells in our body from aging, environmental stressors, and toxin exposure. This little guy is great for everyone: you, your husband, your kids, and even your pets. Our health truly starts with ourselves, and PC gives them the support and maintenance they need. To learn more about BodyBio, head over to their website, www.bodybio.com, and use the code Biohack-it for 20% off your first order. And if you've already purchased BodyBio and want to rebuy, use Iman at checkout for 15% off all your orders.
Your book, Gut Feelings, that I absolutely loved, and anybody listening to this, if you haven't read it, I highly encourage you to do so. It's so well written. It's very articulate, to the point. It's also easy to understand. So it's not like the big medical words. It's very, very easy to digest. You talk about this concept of emotional eating.
Yeah.
That so many people, tend to overlook.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. It's a lot. That book's, a lot of it's about the neuroimmunoendocrine axis, which but it's that intersection between the nervous system, the immune system in the form of inflammation, and the endocrine system, or hormones. And that imbalance, if you think of it like a seesaw, that sympathetic, that fight or flight or freeze response is overactive, and the parasympathetic, the resting, digesting, the grounded, the anti-anxiety pathways are really poor, that poor vagal tone. So a lot of that book, the protocol, was meant to downregulate the sympathetic tone, the fight, flight, or freeze, and increase the parasympathetic, improve vagal tone that way, the resting, digesting. So emotional eating is just, of course, it's going to happen because we have so much neuroimmunoendocrine axis dysregulation. And people's hormones are off, their inflammation levels off, and the nervous system's off. So people have a lot of, both from and part of the levels of the book is like gut feelings there's different levels to that. It's just the cliche that somehow our ancestors knew that the gut was the seat of the soul, but it's also the fact that we have this duality of our body. We have both the gut and the feelings, the physical and the mental, emotional, spiritual. So we have to deal with both the gut and the feelings to start to heal these things. So emotional eating has many different levels to it. It has a physical level of it because 93% of the United States has a massive metabolic problem. And when your blood sugar is on a roller coaster, you're going to have a lot of hangriness and dysregulation and cravings, insatiable cravings with emotional eating. Your cortisol is going to be off. There's going to be a lot of stress eating when there's physiological dysregulation going on in the gut. The bacterial dysbiosis can cause cravings. Studies show that certain colonies forming units of bacteria and yeast and fungus will increase cravings of foods that don't love you back. And then on top of that, the metabolic problem. and other hormonal problems. And then, but there is a mental, emotional, spiritual level of that too, right? We're disconnected from who we are. So there's that level of it as well. So we have to have a both and not either or approach to these things. And it sounds complex, but it really isn't. You just need to be consistent with it. And that's what I tried to do with that book, is to show people this both and approach to healing so they can eat foods that love them back. And it's not one of deprivation or restriction or orthorexia, which is disordered eating or unhealthy food. It's just, no, I love feeling great more than I want something that's going to dim my life. And they're eating nutrient dense foods that love them back. And they can break that emotional eating cycle, which is tough for a lot of people. And on top of that, we're being marketed to, right? We're being marketed to left and right, and we don't even know what to believe. So there's a lot of unlearning and relearning that has to happen.
Over the last couple of years, based on, what you personally kind of experienced with, the recent trauma with your dad passing and all this amazing literature and learnings that you've had and these incredible books that you published, has your practice started to shift, and have you recently started to shift as well every time, you kind of gone through a learning, whether welcomed or unwelcomed?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, yeah, absolutely. And I think I've talked about this with my therapist about it, because it's like that phrase, which I mentioned it in the book, that sort of hermetic phrase of as above, so below, as within, so without, that there's something to that. I think that there was an inner shift for me, and I've seen a shift outward too. And I've always felt like we start our day off at the clinic, telehealth clinic, even though most of my team's remote, there's still a core at the HQ here. We start every morning with prayer and meditation without fail. For the past 14 years, we've done it every morning. And we pray over the patients. And it's just like, hey, God, can you let us be who these people need? Because we know they're going through some heavy things, and we're not their first rodeo when it comes to this healthcare thing. So like, how can we be of service to them? So I've felt a shift. And I think it has to do with what I've gone through, which it's bringing amazing people. It's bringing people that we can help in that way. So some of the best doctors, the best clinicians, their experience comes from their own, like their ability to heal or facilitate improvements in somebody's health journey came from their own experience. So the silver lining and all of the stuff that happened to me, I think just deepened my empathy and ability to help people.
And I think you really see that in the way you communicate and your research and the information you're putting out there. I think you're very, very relatable. A lot of this field has gotten almost like they're speaking at you. It's almost like shouting facts at you, demeaning you, almost making you feel small. And sometimes I just go on social media and I'm like, I know the baseline of things, so it's different. But like to an average person, it can be really overwhelming taking in all this information. 1 minute kale is bad for you, 1 minute this. And the average person is not ready for that.
No, I know it. There's a lot of noise, right? There's a lot of noise online, and it's tough to have discernment, especially when people aren't feeling well and there's so much noise. Yeah. So hopefully, you mentioned like social media. I try to only put up positive. I can't say I only put positive things, sometimes provoking things, and I piss some people off, and it's not meant to piss them off. It's just, sometimes speaking truth is going to irritate people, but it's always done in love, and it's always done in like wanting to call us to something greater.
And help people evolve on their personal journey and make them stop and think about, hey, maybe I should think about this. Maybe I should do a little bit more research into this. When people get activated online, and I call them these keyboard warriors, I'm like, take a second before you're going to react to someone. Take a second and be like, why is this triggering me? What is it bringing up in me? Is it because I have something to deal with, or is it something unresolved for me before I just go into a reactive state?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. It's the mute button is powerful. And if you're finding yourself be a keyboard warrior, which we all can do, like, oh, I'm going to tell them what I think. Like, it really is it going to be adding light into the world or not? And I don't know how many problems actually have been solved in Instagram comment section. I'm pretty sure not very many problems have been solved there.
100%. I was going to ask you, we talked a lot about diet earlier, a little while ago. I want to ask you, when it comes for you, there's a big fad right now around the carnivore diet. What is and you said you have clients that are a little bit slightly more carnivore, kind of lean towards that. How is that going, and what's your actual take on the carnivore diet?
Well, it's born out, the whole conversation is born out of the epidemic rise of autoimmune problems and digestive problems, right? So that's the context of why it's so popular, because it's something that I see all the time as far as these digestive and autoimmune problems. So our like great grandparents and beyond, even our grandparents and beyond, wouldn't even be having to have this conversation because of what we're seeing as a chronic disease epidemic. So foods that otherwise are healthy are causing reactions in people, but it's not the food's fault. It's the immune system's overreaction to it and what we've done to the human microbiome and the human gastrointestinal system and the human immune system. That's the problem. So yeah, I think it's people are reacting to otherwise innocuous, nutrient-dense whole foods. So we use a carnivore-ish protocol for patients who need it, not everybody, for a time. It's almost an ultimate elimination diet to give the gut and the immune system a reprieve, a sort of proverbial siesta in a way, to like repair and gain resilience and calm down and untangle these inflammatory cascades and flare-ups, so we can start building resilience. So I have a bio-individual opinion on these things, that the person, that can be a therapeutic tool from a food standpoint, because they're reacting to a lot of plant proteins, a lot of lectins and phytic acid and fibers and oxalates. And it's just normally would be fine. You just have to properly prepare the food, cook it down. Sometimes some foods are better from a bioavailability standpoint to have them cooked, talking about vegetables, over raw, and nuts and seeds, like soaking and sprouting them, or beans, like pressure cooking them. All these things can be tools to make it digestible for the average person. But what do you say to someone who's having a reaction to every single food? You have to meet their gut where it's at, but we don't have to stay there. Back to your earlier point, like if I'm doing my job, they shouldn't be eating 3 foods. If I'm doing my job, we should be working on diversity of foods to work on, and A, just enjoying food, and B, having a grace and lightness and flexibility to it, and C, like there should be resilience. Like the gut should be able to digest some vegetables and fruits.
Right.
So it's born out of, and that's why you get these silo myopic conversations, and some personalities of which, they're friends of mine in the space. They're just very dogmatic in how they communicate these things. And the context and nuance, I think, can be lost sometimes on social media. And knowing these people behind the scenes, like they've evolved. Not even just behind the scenes. You can see they've evolved their opinions. They used to be a lot more myopic and then even loosened up. So, everybody's learning. And there's a reason why they call doctors practicing, like their practice, because they are practicing themselves. So you'll see a lot of these people evolve over time. They find something that worked for them, and then they just preach it from the rooftops, and people evolve over time. And I've always had sort of a middle of the road position on these things, and the nuance and the context is more interesting to me, of like, well, what works for you, instead of making broad sweeping statements for everybody.
I think that's the beauty of being human, right? There's always evolution. So your opinions can change on your health, your wellness, politics, whatever it may be. And to allow yourself that grace, that the more research you do, you figure out what works for you at that stage of your life.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that might not work for somebody else. And having that evolution as you grow, and being like, I'm not going to be dogmatic about one idea or concept. I'm going to be flexible in taking the learnings that comes with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And two, I think a lot of times the more tribal somebody gets about these things, the more they're actually stressing about it, which stress is like, stressing about healthy food is antithetical to health. So yeah, maybe the food works for you, but you railing on social media about this and like constantly in this fight or flight state because you're trying to preach to everybody, it's not good for your health. Like people need to realize like and that's what that book Gut Feelings is all about. It's not just about what we're feeding our body with breakfast, lunch, and dinner. What are we serving our head and our heart on a daily basis? And the information we're consuming online, how we're treating other people, that's impacting our biochemistry too, just as much as the food.
There's a lot of noise out there right now about supplements, right? Everybody's trying to serve you a supplement. They're like, take this for this and take that for that. And you're like, personally, I know there's a lot of junk out there and people are making claims that are untrue, but then some brands are doing like a really great job. right now in your practice, or just from personal experience, right? What are things that you are like, okay, I'm sold on this. I've looked at the data. I've looked at the research. This is, and you don't have to necessarily give me brands, but just like talking about like what really is working versus what is not.
Well, I mean, I would go for a supplement company that does third-party testing, that has an objective outside testing facility looking at the purity, the efficacy, that you know what you're getting is high quality. So the brands that pay for that third-party testing, they'll let you know that because they paid for it and they want you to know you can trust us. So that's something that I would look at. Look at excipients and fillers and reading like the non-active ingredients, and the more variables you have there, sometimes it's not the active ingredients that are the problem, but it's the excipients, the fillers and things like that. People always ask me, how can I tell? Like I find someone that you trust in the health space and look at what they're talking about. And for my podcast, for example, like I only have sponsors on my podcast of things that I recommend to telehealth patients. I use on my own, or my team loves. It's stuff that I like. I wouldn't promote anything other than that. So fine. If it's not me, it could be somebody else that you really trust and are looking, because there's so much innovation in that space. It's always evolving. Like there's always new brands out there that you learn about, look into as a professional and say, oh yeah, I like what you're doing. You're doing cool things and you want to support a brand that's doing interesting, helpful things for people. We have not to plug my own stuff, but we released the Art of Being Well line for that very thing. People that they don't want a functional medicine doctor. They didn't need telehealth, but they just asked me on social media or they listened to the podcast, hey, like what are some things I can do on my own? So that's why we released the Art of Being Well supplement line. For that very reason, because it's stuff like core essential things that I find to be very effective and science-backed, like methylated B vitamins and adaptogens and vitamin D and gut support and hormonal support and detox support. So that kind of stuff that every human can pick a few things from that line and bring into their life to, serve their own art of being well.
That's a great way, because you've done the research, you've seen kind of what's out there, and you're like, hey, this is the baseline of everything that I think people are missing in their lives, or things that they could add to, deficiencies that they have. And you're like kind of like being like, hey, this is a good starting point. Because that's the one thing I realize online. People are so overwhelmed with the amount of information that's being served to them. They're like, I can't take 100 supplements a day. Where do I even start?
Yeah. Yep.
So with the Art of Being Well, with your line, if somebody's looking at it, what are the 2 or 3 core things that somebody should start with if they don't have their labs yet, or they haven't gone to a doctor like yourself?
Okay. So I would say the core things that I take that I would recommend anybody would be vitamin D3, K2. Everybody should look at their vitamin D status, but you can take this. A methylated B vitamin, it's called the methylator. Vitamin D3, K2 methylator. And then third, I would say omega, it's a high quality fish oil with long chain omega-3 fatty acids. I'd say the omega would be 3. And 4, I would say some sort of adaptogenic blend would be helpful for people. The brain adrenal balancer is one of them. I love, I would also add this. And the list is getting bigger now. I apologize. But there's a blend called Chill, which is a powder that has a lot of GABAergic. So if you wanted to not take the adaptogen, you could take Chill, which I love to calm stress, anxiety, calm stress hormones, and magnesium. This magnesium is a game changer, and so many people are deficient in magnesium, and it has this lemon lime flavor. You can get plain too if you want, but the lemon lime, and it has magnesium threonate, which the nervous system loves the magnesium threonate. So it is helpful for sleep, anxiety, stress, energy, all this stuff, because it's an electrolyte. Magnesium is an electrolyte, so it's helping to facilitate nerve conduction in the body. So that was more than 3, but yeah, that would be my pick.
But that one sounds so amazing, because I think so many people have such dysregulated nervous systems that are causing this cascade of other health issues in their bodies, and it's just trickling down. So if you can just regulate that, get better quality of sleep, get yourself a little bit more regulated, obviously lower your cortisol levels because you're less stressed when you have this jerkiness in the morning, then overall you'll see an increase in so many health benefits that'll come from that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I wanted to make sure I ask you a closing tradition that I have on the podcast. And that's kind of will bring us towards the end. But what is the one lesson or learning to date that has been crucial for you on your personal evolution and has carried with you throughout your journey?
Well, that's pretty easy. It's because it's a mantra at the clinic here, and something I write a lot about it. You read the books, you know, is you can't heal a body you hate. You cannot heal a body you hate. You cannot shame your way into wellness. You cannot obsess your way into health. And that's what I'm trying to do, is bring this art of being well into, whether it's my patients, people that listen to the podcast, or people that just get supplements. It's checking your head and your heart about these things. Because even in the biohacking space, I mean, you know, I love biohack. I do it all day long. But stressing about this, becoming obsessive about this, having that sort of type A energy when it comes to this frenetic energy is antithetical to wellness. And we need to, sometimes doing less is the best, because if you're stressing about the more, it's too much for your vessel right now. And you need to like bring it back some so you can find something sustainable that has a rhythm of grace and lightness in your life. So that's what I would say to everybody listening to this.
I think, you know, without a doubt, you know, the more I get to know you and obviously have known you, you being one of the leading functional practitioners in the world makes sense because you take such a holistic yet science-backed approach. And you yourself as an individual and your practice is so relatable to people. And I think that's where the real magic and connections happens, because you've left the human and the individuality still in the science.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. It means a lot coming from you.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for doing this with me. And I'm so excited to have this episode launch and bring it to you guys. And thank you.
Thanks for having me.